The dust-filled air of Silver Creek Station clung to Theodora Montgomery's skirts as she stood alone on the wooden platform, her gaze fixed on the empty horizon where the stagecoach had disappeared over an hour ago. Her trunk sat beside her, a single valise clutched in her gloved hand, and the crushing weight of abandonment pressing down on her shoulders. The man who had promised to make her his wife, a stranger she had only known through 6 months of correspondence, was nowhere to be found. "He ain't coming, miss," the station master said for the 3rd time, his weathered face a mask of pity. "Been saying it since the stage rolled in. Folks like Harris Whitfield don't typically keep their promises to mail-order brides." Theodora straightened her spine, refusing to let the tears gathering behind her eyes fall. "Perhaps there was an emergency, sir. Mr. Whitfield assured me he would be here to collect me." The year was 1878, and Theodora had traveled all the way from Boston to the Wyoming Territory with nothing but hope and a handful of letters promising a new life. At 22, she had left behind a life of genteel poverty, the death of her parents, and the looming threat of becoming dependent on distant relatives who had made it clear she was unwelcome. "Suit yourself, miss," the station master sighed, tipping his hat. "Station closes at sundown. You got about 3 hours to face facts." As the man walked away, Theodora sank onto her trunk, the reality of her situation washing over her like ice water. No money for a return ticket. No family to wire for help. No prospects in this dusty frontier town she had never meant to call home. The late afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, and Theodora removed her bonnet, fanning herself weakly as she watched the few townsfolk going about their business. Silver Creek was larger than she had imagined, a proper main street lined with establishments, homes scattered beyond, and the promise of civilization, albeit a rougher version than she was accustomed to. A commotion down the street drew her attention. A man on horseback was racing toward the station, his black stallion kicking up clouds of dust. He rode with the easy confidence of someone who had spent his life in the saddle, and as he approached, Theodora caught sight of a face weathered by sun and wind, partially obscured by the shadow of his hat. The rider pulled his horse to a stop at the edge of the platform, dismounting in one fluid motion. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in worn denim, a faded blue shirt, and a dusty brown vest. The gun belt around his waist spoke of the dangers of frontier life, but it was his eyes that captured Theodora's attention, sharp blue, assessing, yet somehow kind. "Madam," he said, tipping his hat, "you look like you've been waiting a while." "I'm waiting for my fiancé," Theodora replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "Mr. Harris Whitfield. He was to meet me on the noon stage." Something flashed across the man's face, recognition, followed swiftly by what appeared to be anger, quickly controlled. "Harris Whitfield," he repeated, his voice flat. "Yes. Do you know him, sir?" The man studied her for a long moment, then extended his hand. "Remington Grant. Most folks call me Remington." Theodora hesitantly placed her gloved hand in his. "Theodora Montgomery. A pleasure to make your acquaintance, Mr. Grant." "Miss Montgomery," he said, releasing her hand and glancing at her trunk. "I believe there's something you should know about Harris Whitfield." A cold dread settled in her stomach. What might that be? "He left town 3 days ago, sold his property to me, and headed for California. Said something about striking it rich in the gold fields." The words struck Theodora like physical blows. She had been abandoned, left stranded in a strange town with no resources and no connections. She swayed slightly, and Rem's hand shot out to steady her. "I'm sorry to be the bearer of such news," he said, his voice gentler now. "But it seems to me that you were waiting for me all along." Theodora stiffened. "I beg your pardon." A small smile touched his lips. "Not like that, madam. What I mean is, I bought Whitfield's ranch. Lock, stock, and barrel. Everything he owned is now mine." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "Including, it seems, his obligations." "I am not property to be transferred, Mr. Grant," Theodora said, her voice icy despite the heat. "No, madam, you certainly are not," he agreed readily. "But you are a lady in need of assistance, and I'm in a position to offer it. Whitfield's place, my place, now has a small caretaker's cabin. It's modest but clean. You could stay there while you decide what you want to do next." Theodora regarded him suspiciously. "And what would you expect in return for this generosity?" Rem's eyes widened slightly, then narrowed in understanding. Nothing improper, Miss Montgomery. My mother raised me better than that. He glanced around the nearly deserted station. But the fact is, Silver Creek isn't the safest place for a woman alone, especially one with no connections and nowhere to go. Theodora knew he was right. Her options were painfully limited. Pride demanded she refuse his charity, but practicality insisted she accept it, at least temporarily. I can cook, she offered, and I'm handy with a needle. I could earn my keep. Rem nodded. That would be more than fair. I've been living on my own cooking since I bought the place, and I can tell you, the chickens are starting to hide when they see me coming. Despite everything, Theodora found herself smiling at his small joke. Very well, Mr. Grant. I accept your offer, temporarily, until I can make other arrangements. Good, he said simply, then lifted her trunk with ease. I'll secure this to my pack horse. Can you ride? Not well, she admitted. I've only ridden in parks, on gentle mares. Diablo here isn't gentle, but he's steady, Rem said, patting his stallion's neck. You'll ride with me. The ranch is about 5 miles out of town. Before Theodora could protest, Rem had lashed her trunk to a second horse she hadn't noticed, tethered a short distance away. He returned, offering his hand. Ready, Miss Montgomery? With a deep breath, Theodora placed her hand in his and allowed him to help her mount. She settled sideways on the saddle, her skirts arranged as modestly as possible. Rem swung up behind her, his arms creating a protective circle as he took the reins. Hold on, he instructed, and Theodora reluctantly gripped the saddle horn, acutely aware of the impropriety of their position. As they rode through Silver Creek, Theodora felt the curious stares of townsfolk. She held her head high, ignoring the whispers that followed them. Don't mind them, Rem said quietly. Small towns run on gossip. What will they be saying about us, Mr. Grant? Nothing good, I expect, he answered honestly. But their opinions don't matter much to me, and they shouldn't to you either. The town soon gave way to open country, rolling hills covered in sage and grass, with mountains rising majestically in the distance. Despite her circumstances, Theodora couldn't help but be moved by the wild beauty surrounding them. It's breathtaking, she murmured. That it is, Rem agreed. Different from Boston, I imagine. Very different. How did you know I'm from Boston? Your accent. Plus, Whitfield mentioned he was bringing in a bride from back east. They rode in silence for a while, the rhythmic movement of the horse and the warmth of the fading day lulling Theodora into a strange calm. Her life had been upended, her plans shattered, yet here she was, riding into the unknown with a stranger who had offered help when she needed it most. Why did you do it? She asked suddenly. Do what? Offer me a place to stay. You don't know me. Rem was quiet for a moment. I know what it's like to be stranded with nowhere to go, he finally said. When I first came west, I was just a boy. Had some hard times before I found my footing. I figure passing on a kindness is the least a man can do. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, a ranch came into view. It was modest compared to the grand estates Theodora had seen in the east, but substantial by frontier standards. A main house of hewn logs, a large barn, corrals for horses and cattle, and several smaller outbuildings scattered about the property. Welcome to the Rocking G, Rem said as they approached. That's what I'm calling it now, anyway. Whitfield just called it the ranch. It's lovely, Theodora said sincerely, taking in the scenic setting against the backdrop of distant mountains. Rem guided the horses to the hitching post in front of the main house and dismounted before helping Theodora down. Her legs felt wobbly after the long ride, and she steadied herself against the post. The caretaker's cabin is just over there. Rem pointed to a small structure about 50 yards from the main house. I'll get your trunk and show you around. The cabin was indeed small, but tidy. A single room with a bed, a table with 2 chairs, a small cook stove, and a chest of drawers. A window looked out toward the main house, and a smaller one on the side wall faced the mountains. It's not much, Rem said, setting her trunk down, but it's clean. Previous caretaker was an old-timer named Jenkins. Decided to move to town when Whitfield sold up. It will do nicely, thank you, Theodora said, removing her gloves and bonnet. Rem lingered in the doorway, seeming uncertain. There's a pump just outside for water. Outhouse is behind the cabin. I've got some stew on at the main house if you're hungry. Theodora was famished, having eaten nothing since a hasty breakfast on the stagecoach, but the thought of imposing further made her hesitate. I wouldn't want to be a bother, she began. No bother, Rem cut in. Got to eat anyway. Why don't you get settled, and I'll come fetch you in about half an hour. After he left, Theodora sank onto the bed, the events of the day finally catching up with her. Tears welled in her eyes, and this time, she let them fall. She had been so certain that Harris Whitfield was her chance at a new beginning, a decent man who would provide her with security and perhaps, in time, affection. His letters had been kind, thoughtful, painting a picture of a life they would build together. All lies, it seemed. Theodora allowed herself exactly 5 minutes of self-pity before wiping her eyes and standing up. She was alone in a strange place, dependent on the kindness of a man she had just met, but she was not without resources. She had her education, her skills, and her determination. She would find a way forward. She unpacked a few essentials, washed her face and hands at the pump, and changed into a fresh blouse, keeping the same traveling skirt. Just as she was pinning her hair back into a neat bun, a knock came at the door. Rem stood outside, hat in hand. Stew's ready if you are, Miss Montgomery. The main house was rustic but comfortable, with a large main room serving as both kitchen and living area. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, and simple, sturdy furniture filled the space. Rem gestured to the table, already set with 2 bowls, spoons, and a loaf of bread that looked store-bought. Please sit, he said, moving to the cast-iron stove where a pot bubbled. It's nothing fancy, but it's filling. The stew was surprisingly good beef, potatoes, carrots, and onions in a rich broth. Theodora ate hungrily, realizing just how famished she was. This is excellent, Mr. Grant, she said sincerely. One of the few things I can cook without burning, he admitted with a small smile. And please, call me Remington. Mr. Grant makes me feel like I should be looking over my shoulder for my father. Then you must call me Theodora, she replied, then added, though most people call me Thea. Thea, he repeated, as if testing the name. It suits you. They ate in companionable silence for a while before Rem spoke again. I should tell you more about what happened with Whitfield, he said. You deserve to know the truth. Thea set down her spoon, bracing herself. Yes, I would appreciate that. I've known Harris Whitfield for about 2 years. He came to Silver Creek with big plans, bought this ranch, started building it up. Seemed to be doing well. Rem broke off a piece of bread, considering his words. About 3 months ago, things changed. He started gambling heavily in town, drinking more than usual. Word was he'd made some bad investments, lost most of his cash reserves. He never mentioned any financial difficulties in his letters, Thea said quietly. I doubt he would. Men like Whitfield protect their pride above all else. Rem's expression darkened. A week ago, he approached me about buying the ranch. Said he'd had an opportunity come up in California, needed to move fast. The price was fair. I had the money saved, so we made the deal. And he said nothing about me? About his plans to marry. Rem hesitated. He mentioned he had a bride coming from back east, but said he'd sent a letter breaking things off. When I saw you at the station today, I knew that was a lie. Thea felt the blood drain from her face. So he simply abandoned me, left me to fend for myself in a strange town. I'm afraid so. It's not right, what he did to you. No, it isn't. Thea agreed, anger replacing her shock. But I suppose I'm partly to blame. I was desperate to escape my circumstances in Boston, willing to marry a man I'd never met based on a few well-written letters. Don't be too hard on yourself, Rem said gently. Plenty of marriages start that way out here. Most work out well enough. Perhaps, Thea sighed. But now I find myself in quite a predicament. You have options, Rem assured her. Silver Creek's growing. The school might need a teacher. The general store owner's wife was saying just last week they need someone with a good hand for bookkeeping. You would help me find employment? Of course, Rem said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. But there's no rush. You're welcome to stay here as long as you need. The ranch could use a woman's touch, to be honest. Thea studied him across the table, this man who had extended such kindness to a stranger. He was handsome in a rugged way, with those striking blue eyes, dark hair that curled slightly at his collar, and a strong jawline softened by the hint of a smile that seemed to appear when he looked at her. "Why aren't you married, Rem?" The question slipped out before she could stop it, and Thea immediately flushed. "I apologize. That was terribly forward of me." To her relief, Rem didn't seem offended. "No need to apologize. It's a fair question." He leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "I was engaged once, about 5 years ago. Her name was Sarah. She died of fever before we could marry." "I'm so sorry," Thea said softly. "Thank you. It was a hard time." Rem's gaze drifted to the window, where darkness had fallen. "After that, I threw myself into working, saving to buy my own place. Never seemed to find the right time or the right woman to start over." The vulnerability in his admission touched Thea deeply. "I understand that. My parents died within months of each other 2 years ago. Typhoid. I've been staying with my father's cousin since then, but it was made clear I had overstayed my welcome." "So you answered Whitfield's advertisement?" "Yes." His letters spoke of partnership, respect, building a life together. It wasn't love, but it seemed like a chance at something meaningful. Thea shook her head ruefully. "Clearly, I was mistaken." "His loss," Rem said simply, rising to clear their empty bowls. "Would you like coffee?" They sat by the fire with their coffee, talking as the night deepened around them. Rem told her about growing up in Missouri, coming west at 16 to make his fortune, working as a cowhand, then a foreman, saving every penny toward his dream of owning land. Thea shared stories of her childhood in Boston, her father's work as a professor of literature, her mother's talents as a musician. "It's getting late," Rem finally said, noticing Thea trying to stifle a yawn. "You must be exhausted after your journey." "It has been a rather eventful day," she agreed, rising from her chair. Rem walked her back to the cabin, carrying a lantern to light their way. At her door, he handed her the light. "Sleep well, Thea. Things often look brighter in the morning." "Thank you for everything, Remington. Your kindness has been unexpected, but deeply appreciated." He tipped his hat with a smile. "Good night." Alone in the cabin, Thea prepared for bed, her mind racing with the day's events. As she blew out the lantern and lay in the darkness, listening to the unfamiliar night sounds of the Wyoming wilderness, she realized that for all the upheaval and disappointment, she felt something she hadn't expected: hope. Morning came with golden light streaming through the small windows of the cabin. Thea woke disoriented for a moment before remembering where she was and all that had happened. She dressed quickly in a simple day dress of pale blue, pinned her hair in a practical style, and stepped outside to greet her first full day in her new surroundings. The ranch was already alive with activity. Rem was in the corral working with a young horse, while a Mexican man Thea hadn't met was leading a team of horses toward the barn. Chickens scratched in the dirt near a small coop, and in the distance, cattle grazed on the rolling grasslands. Taking a deep breath of the clean mountain air, Thea made her way to the main house. Finding the door unlocked, she entered and set about making breakfast. By the time Rem came in, she had coffee brewing and biscuits in the oven. "Good morning," she greeted him. "I hope you don't mind my taking liberties with your kitchen." Rem looked pleasantly surprised. "Mind? I haven't had a home-cooked breakfast in months." "Consider it the beginning of earning my keep," Thea said, bustling about the kitchen with growing confidence. "I found eggs and bacon. I hope that's suitable." "More than suitable," Rem assured her, washing up at the basin by the door. As they ate, Rem outlined the day ahead. "Miguel the man you might have seen this morning, and I need to ride out to check on the north pasture cattle. I'll be gone most of the day." "I'll be fine here," Thea said. "In fact, I thought I might do some cleaning. This house could use a woman's touch, as you said." "You don't have to do that," Rem protested. "I want to," Thea insisted. "It will give me purpose, and I need that right now." Rem studied her face, then nodded in understanding. "All right, just don't work too hard. There's no rush to get everything done in a day." After breakfast, Rem showed Thea around the property before he left the smokehouse, the root cellar, the chicken coop, and the kitchen garden that had been neglected but still produced a few vegetables. He introduced her to Miguel Sanchez, who lived in another small cabin on the far side of the barn with his wife, Rosalinda. "Rosa will be back from visiting her sister in town tomorrow," Miguel explained in accented but clear English. "She will be happy to have another woman on the ranch." With Rem and Miguel gone, Thea threw herself into cleaning the main house. It wasn't filthy, but it had the unmistakable feel of a place inhabited solely by men, functional but lacking attention to details that made a house a home. She found sheets in a trunk, aired them in the sunshine, and made up the beds properly. She scrubbed floors, dusted shelves, and organized the pantry. In a back bedroom that appeared unused, she discovered a small bookshelf with a surprising collection: Shakespeare, Dickens, Thoreau, and several volumes of poetry. She ran her fingers along the spines, wondering if they had belonged to Whitfield or if Rem was a secret reader. Somehow, she suspected the latter. By late afternoon, Thea was pleasantly tired but satisfied with her progress. The house already felt more welcoming. She had prepared a stew for supper, letting it simmer slowly on the stove while she sat on the front porch, enjoying the spectacular view as the sun began its descent toward the mountains. The sound of hoofbeats announced Rem's return. He dismounted wearily, leading his horse toward the barn. Thea watched him move with the easy grace of a man comfortable in his own skin, at home in this wild landscape. Something stirred within her: admiration, certainly, but perhaps something more. When Rem emerged from the barn and spotted her on the porch, his face lit up with a smile that sent an unexpected flutter through Thea's chest. "You're still here," he called as he approached. "I half expected to find a note saying you'd taken the first stage back east and miss experiencing the wild Wyoming Territory." Thea returned his smile. "Besides, I promised you a decent meal, and I keep my promises, unlike some people we could name." Rem chuckled as he climbed the porch steps. "Something smells mighty good. Beef stew with dumplings," Thea said, rising from her chair. "And I found apples in the root cellar, so there's pie for dessert." "Pie?" Rem's eyes widened comically. "Miss Montgomery, you may never be allowed to leave." The casual comment hung in the air between them, and Thea felt her cheeks warm slightly. "Well, we should eat before it gets cold," she said, turning toward the door. Inside, Rem stopped in his tracks, looking around at the transformed house. "You've been busy," he said, taking in the clean floors, the neatly arranged furniture, the wildflowers in a jar on the table. "I hope you don't mind," Thea said. "I didn't change anything significant, just tidied up." "Mind, it looks better than it ever has." Rem's voice held genuine appreciation. "Thank you, Thea." Over supper, Rem told her about his day: the cattle they'd moved to fresher grazing, the fence repairs they'd made, his plans for improving the ranch. Thea found herself genuinely interested, asking questions and offering suggestions that Rem seemed to value. "You know," he said as they lingered over coffee and apple pie, "you're nothing like I expected a Boston lady to be." "Oh, and what did you expect? Someone more delicate, I suppose. Someone who'd take one look at ranch life and run screaming back to civilization." Thea laughed. "I may have been raised in Boston, but my mother came from farming stock in Vermont. She made sure I knew how to cook, clean, and manage a household properly. And as for being delicate," she held up her hands, which already showed signs of honest work, "I believe in being useful. A rare quality in anyone, man or woman," Rem observed. "I appreciate it." As the evening progressed, they moved to the sitting area near the fireplace. Rem added logs to the fire against the cooling night air, and they continued talking, sharing stories and opinions with surprising ease. "I noticed the books in the back bedroom," Thea mentioned. "Are they yours?" Rem looked slightly embarrassed. "Yes, not what most people expect from a rancher, I suppose." "I think it's wonderful," Thea said sincerely. "My father was a professor of literature. Some of my fondest memories are of him reading aloud to my mother and me in the evenings." "My mother taught me to read early," Rem explained. "She was a schoolteacher before she married my father. Books were precious in our house. When I came west, I couldn't bring much, but I made room for a few favorites." "Would you read something?" Thea asked impulsively. "I miss the sound of poetry read aloud." Rem hesitated only briefly before rising and disappearing into the back bedroom. He returned with a volume of Tennyson, settling back into his chair. "Any preferences?" he asked. "You choose," Thea said, curling her legs beneath her in her chair. Rem opened the book to a well-worn page and began to read Ulysses in a rich, clear voice that filled the room. Thea watched him, mesmerized by the transformation, the rugged rancher giving voice to immortal words with feeling and understanding. When he finished, silence hung in the air, broken only by the crackling of the fire. "That was beautiful," Thea said softly. "You read as if you understand every word." "I've always liked that poem," Rem admitted. "The idea that it's never too late to seek a newer world, that age doesn't mean the end of adventure or purpose. To strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield," Thea quoted the final line. "A fitting motto for life on the frontier, I should think." Rem looked at her with new appreciation. "You know your Tennyson." "I know my literature," Thea corrected with a smile. "Another useful skill from my upbringing, though perhaps not as practical as cooking or cleaning." "I disagree," Rem said, closing the book carefully. "The mind needs feeding as much as the body. Maybe more so, out here where it's easy to become isolated." They talked about books until Thea could no longer stifle her yawns. Rem walked her back to her cabin as he had the night before, the path now illuminated by bright moonlight. "Thank you for today," he said as they reached her door. "For the meals, the cleaning, the conversation. It's been a long time since this place felt like a home." "Thank you for giving me a place to stay," Thea replied. "And for being kind when you had no obligation to be." Rem's eyes held hers for a moment longer than necessary. "Good night, Thea." "Good night, Remington." Inside her cabin, Thea prepared for bed with a lightness in her heart she hadn't expected to feel so soon after Whitfield's betrayal. As she drifted off to sleep, she found herself thinking not of the man who had abandoned her, but of the one who had welcomed her into his home and, perhaps, into his life. Days turned into weeks as Thea settled into life at the Rocking G. Each morning brought new tasks and challenges, but also a growing sense of belonging. She took over the running of the household, cooking meals, tending the kitchen garden, and bringing order to what had been a bachelor's domain. Rosalinda Sanchez returned from visiting her sister and quickly became Thea's friend and ally. The Mexican woman was a few years older than Thea, with a warm laugh and skilled hands that could create beautiful embroidery or help deliver a calf with equal competence. "You are good for Senor Rem," Rosa told Thea one afternoon as they gathered vegetables from the now thriving garden. "He smiles more since you came." "We're just friends," Thea insisted, though her heart quickened at Rosa's words. "He offered me shelter when I needed it. That's all." Rosa's knowing smile suggested she wasn't convinced. "Friends, see." For now, Thea couldn't deny, even to herself, that her feelings for Rem were growing more complex with each passing day. She admired his quiet strength, his integrity, his kindness not just to her, but to everyone who worked for him. She enjoyed their evening conversations, the way he listened to her opinions as if they mattered, the shared laughter over small daily occurrences. For his part, Rem seemed to seek out her company whenever his work allowed. He brought her wildflowers he found on the range, shared interesting books from his collection, and taught her to ride properly on a gentle mare named Buttercup he'd purchased specifically for her. "You can't live on a ranch and not know how to ride," he'd insisted when she protested the expense. Their first riding lesson had been both terrifying and exhilarating for Thea. Rem was a patient teacher, but his hands guiding her posture, adjusting her grip on the reins, sent shivers through her that had nothing to do with fear. "Relax," he'd said, his voice close to her ear as he stood beside the horse. "Buttercup can sense your tension. Breathe deeply and let your body move with hers." By the end of that first lesson, Thea had managed to walk and trot around the corral without gripping the saddle in panic. The pride in Rem's eyes when she dismounted had been worth every moment of fear. Now, a month after her arrival, Thea rode confidently beside Rem as they explored the ranch. They crested a hill, and Rem reined in his horse, gesturing to the vista before them, rolling grasslands stretching to distant mountains, a creek winding through the valley below, cattle grazing peacefully in the lush pasture. "This is my favorite spot on the ranch," Rem said. "When I bought this place, I rode up here and just sat for hours, hardly believing it was mine." "It's breathtaking," Thea agreed, understanding his pride. "You've built something wonderful here, Remington." They dismounted, letting the horses graze while they sat on a fallen log, sharing the lunch Thea had packed: cold chicken, biscuits, and apple tarts. "I've been meaning to ask you something," Rem said after they'd eaten. his expression growing serious. "Have you given any thought to what you want to do next?" The question caught Thea off guard. She had been so content in her new routine that she'd pushed aside thoughts of her uncertain future. "Are you asking me to leave?" she asked, her stomach tightening with sudden anxiety. "No." Rem looked horrified at the suggestion. "God, no, Thea. I'm asking because I was in town yesterday, and Mrs. Peterson at the general store mentioned again that they need someone to help with the books. And Reverend Collins said the school committee is still looking for a teacher for the fall term." "Oh," Thea said, relief washing through her. "I see. You have options, is what I'm saying," Rem continued. "You don't have to stay at the ranch out of gratitude or because you think you have nowhere else to go." Thea studied his face, trying to understand what he wasn't saying. "Do you want me to take one of those positions?" Rem looked away, his jaw tightening. "I want you to do what makes you happy, Thea. And if staying at the ranch makes me happy?" His eyes snapped back to hers, hope and uncertainty warring in their blue depths. "Does it?" "Yes," Thea said simply. "More than I ever expected it would." The tension in Rem's shoulders eased slightly. "I'm glad to hear that. The place wouldn't be the same without you now." They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching an eagle soar overhead, the sun warm on their faces despite the cool autumn breeze. "There's a harvest dance in town next Saturday," Rem said suddenly. "Would you like to go? With me, I mean." Thea smiled at his nervousness. "I'd like that very much." The week leading up to the dance passed in a flurry of activity. Thea spent hours with Rosa, altering one of her better dresses for the occasion, a deep green wool that brought out the auburn highlights in her brown hair. "Senor Rem will not be able to take his eyes off you," Rosa declared as Thea tried on the finished dress the day before the dance. "Don't be silly," Thea said, though she couldn't help the pleased flush that rose to her cheeks. The night of the dance arrived clear and cool. Rem appeared at Thea's cabin door looking transformed, clean-shaven, hair neatly trimmed, wearing a white shirt, black vest, and his best denims. The appreciative look in his eyes when Thea opened the door made all the work on her dress worthwhile. "You look beautiful," he said simply. "And you look very handsome," Thea returned, accepting his arm as they walked to the wagon where Miguel and Rosa were already waiting. The town hall was decorated with autumn leaves and harvest bounty pumpkins, corn shocks, and late-blooming wildflowers. Lanterns cast a warm glow over the proceedings, and a small band played lively tunes that had couples whirling across the wooden floor. Thea felt the curious stares as they entered, heard the whispers behind raised hands. News of her arrival as Whitfield's abandoned bride had clearly made the rounds, and now her appearance with Rem was causing fresh speculation. "Ignore them," Rem murmured, his hand warm at the small of her back. "They'll find something new to gossip about by next week." They were approached by a middle-aged couple, the Petersons from the general store, Rem explained during introductions. "Miss Montgomery," Mrs. Peterson said warmly. "We've heard so much about you. Is it true you were a bookkeeper in Boston?" "I helped with my father's accounts," Thea acknowledged. "He was a professor with a terrible head for numbers." "You must come by the store sometime," Mr. Peterson encouraged. "We could certainly use someone with your skills." "Thank you for the offer," Thea said politely. "I'll consider it." More introductions followed: the blacksmith and his wife, the doctor, the banker, the Reverend Collins, and his wife. All were welcoming, if openly curious about her relationship with Remington. "May I have this dance?" Rem asked as the band struck up a waltz. Thea placed her hand in his, allowing him to lead her onto the floor. Rem proved to be an unexpectedly graceful dancer, guiding her confidently through the steps. "You dance very well for a rancher," she teased. "My mother insisted I learn," he explained with a smile. Said no son of hers would stomp around a dance floor like a bull in a china shop. As they moved together, the rest of the room seemed to fade away. Thea was acutely aware of Rem's hand at her waist, the subtle scent of soap and leather that was uniquely his, the way his eyes never left hers. "People are watching us," she whispered. "Let them," Rem replied, drawing her slightly closer. "I don't care what they think." The evening progressed with more dancing, conversation, and surprisingly good food from the potluck supper. Thea found herself genuinely enjoying the company of Silver Creek's residents, particularly Sarah Collins, the Reverend's young wife, who invited Thea to join the ladies' quilting circle. We meet every Tuesday afternoon, Sarah explained enthusiastically. It's as much for socializing as for quilting, to be honest. The winters can be isolating out here. As the dance was winding down, Rem was called away by the sheriff to help settle a dispute between two slightly drunk cowboys. Thea stood near the refreshment table, watching the remaining dancers, when a tall, elegantly dressed man approached her. "Miss Montgomery, I presume?" he said, his accent marking him as Eastern educated. "Allow me to introduce myself. Jonathan Mercer, at your service." Thea offered her hand politely. "A pleasure, Mr. Mercer." "The pleasure is mine," he replied, his eyes appraising her in a way that made her slightly uncomfortable. "I've heard quite a bit about Harris Whitfield's abandoned bride taking up residence with Remington Grant." The directness of his statement took Thea aback. News travels quickly in small towns, it seems. Indeed it does. Mercer's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I own the bank here in Silver Creek. I also own the note on Whitfield's ranch, the one Grant somehow managed to pay off in full when he bought the property." "I'm not sure why you're telling me this, Mr. Mercer," Thea said coolly. "Just making conversation," Mercer replied with a shrug. "I find it interesting that Grant, who never showed interest in settling down before, suddenly has a lovely Eastern lady living on his property. Quite the coincidence." There was nothing coincidental about it. Rem's voice came from behind Thea. "I offered Miss Montgomery shelter when she needed it. Something anyone with decency would have done." Mercer's smile tightened. "Of course. Very chivalrous of you, Grant. If you'll excuse us," Rem said, placing a protective hand at Thea's elbow. "I believe this is our dance." As Rem led her away, Thea could feel Mercer's eyes following them. "What was that about?" she asked quietly. "Mercer and I have a history," Rem explained, his jaw tight. "He's used to getting his way in this town, and he wanted Whitfield's ranch for himself. Didn't take kindly to me buying it out from under him. He seemed to be implying something about our arrangement," Thea said, a note of worry in her voice. Rem's hand tightened slightly on hers as he guided her through the dance. "Mercer loves stirring up trouble. Don't let him bother you." But the encounter had cast a shadow over the evening. On the wagon ride home, Thea was quieter than usual, mulling over Mercer's insinuations and the curious stares that had followed her and Rem throughout the night. When they reached the ranch, Miguel and Rosa tactfully headed straight to their cabin, leaving Rem to walk Thea to her door. "I'm sorry about Mercer," Rem said as they paused outside her cabin. "He's a snake." "It's not just him," Thea sighed. "It's everything. The whispers, the looks. I've put you in an awkward position, Remington. People are talking." "Let them talk," Rem said firmly. "What's between us is our business, no one else's." The words hung in the air between them. What was between them? They hadn't put a name to it. This growing connection, this deepening bond. "And what is between us, Rem?" Thea asked softly, her heart pounding. In the moonlight, Rem's eyes were dark and intense as they searched her face. "Something I never expected to find again," he answered, his voice rough with emotion. "Something I'm afraid to name for fear of losing it." He stepped closer, one hand coming up to gently touch her cheek. "May I kiss you, Thea?" In answer, Thea tilted her face up to his. Rem's lips met hers in a kiss so tender it brought tears to her eyes, a kiss that spoke of longing, of hope, of possibilities neither had dared voice. When they finally parted, Rem rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since the day I found you at the station," he confessed. "I'm glad you waited until now," Thea said, smiling through the tears that threatened. "It meant more this way." Rem brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch reverent. "I should let you get some rest." "Good night, Rem," Thea whispered, reluctant to break the moment, but knowing it was proper to part. "Sweet dreams, Thea." As she prepared for bed that night, Thea's mind whirled with emotions. She had come to Wyoming expecting to marry one man, and now found herself falling in love with another, a man so different from what she had imagined for herself, yet somehow exactly what she needed. For the first time since arriving, Thea allowed herself to truly envision a future here, not as a temporary resident of the caretaker's cabin, but as a permanent part of the rocking G, a permanent part of Rem's life. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. As autumn deepened toward winter, the relationship between Thea and Rem blossomed like the wild roses that clung to the creek banks gradually at first, then with increasing boldness. Their evening conversations often ended with lingering kisses on the porch, her hands in his hair, his arms around her waist, both of them reluctant to part for the night. During the days, they worked side by side when Rem wasn't out on the range, Thea learning the rhythms of ranch life, Rem appreciating the touches of civilization she brought to his world. She had taken over the bookkeeping for the ranch, displaying a natural head for figures that impressed Remington. You could still take that position with the Petersons if you wanted, Rem told her one evening as they sat by the fire, her head resting comfortably on his shoulder. You shouldn't feel obligated to stay here. I don't feel obligated, Thea assured him, lifting her head to meet his gaze. I stay because I want to be here, with you. The first snow came in early November, transforming the ranch into a wonderland of white. Thea woke to find the world hushed and pristine, excitement bubbling within her like a child on Christmas morning. She dressed quickly and hurried outside, laughing as snowflakes caught in her eyelashes. Rem found her attempting to build a snowman near the corral. I've never seen anyone so happy about weather that makes ranching twice as difficult, he said, though his smile belied any real complaint. Snow was always magical in Boston, Thea explained, her cheeks pink with cold and exertion. Everything looked clean and new, if only for a little while. It looks good on you, Rem observed, reaching out to brush a snowflake from her hair. The gesture turned into a caress, and then they were kissing in the snow, her cold hands finding warmth inside his coat, his arms pulling her close against the chill. Marry me, Rem said suddenly when they broke apart, the words forming clouds of vapor between them. Thea stared at him, certain she had misheard. What did you say? Marry me, he repeated, more firmly this time. I know it hasn't been long, and maybe I should wait, do this properly with a ring and all, but Thea silenced him with another kiss, pouring all her feelings into it before pulling back to say, yes, yes, I'll marry you, Remington. His face lit up with joy, and he lifted her off her feet, spinning her in a circle that sent snow flying around them. When he set her down, his expression grew more serious. I want you to be sure, Thea. I'm not Whitfield. I can't offer you a fancy life or connections to society. Just this ranch, my name, and everything I am. That's all I want, Thea said sincerely. You're all I want. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Silver Creek. The town turned out in force for the event partly out of genuine goodwill, partly out of curiosity about the unlikely couple who had become the subject of so much speculation. Sarah Collins had helped Thea alter a cream-colored dress found in the town's only dry goods store, adding lace from her own wedding gown to the collar and cuffs. Rosa contributed a beautiful hand-embroidered veil, and Mrs. Peterson gifted a pair of delicate pearl earrings passed down from my grandmother. Rem waited at the altar looking both nervous and determined in a new black suit. When Thea appeared at the back of the church on the arm of Dr. Williams, who had graciously offered to give her away, Rem's face transformed with a look of such naked adoration that tears sprang to Thea's eyes. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. Reverend Collins spoke of love's unexpected paths, of divine providence bringing two souls together across great distances. When it came time for their vows, Rem's voice was clear and steady. I, Remington James Grant, take you, Theodora Elizabeth Montgomery, to be my lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part. Thea's voice trembled slightly with emotion as she repeated the sacred words, hardly believing that the man before her, this good, honorable man who had rescued her when she was at her lowest, was now to be her husband. By the power vested in me, Reverend Collins concluded, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride. Rem's kiss was gentle but possessive, a promise of all that was to come. The church erupted in applause and cheers as they turned to face their new community as Mr. and Mrs. Grant. The celebration continued at the town hall, where the ladies of Silver Creek had prepared a feast. There was dancing and laughter, toasts and well wishes. Even Jonathan Mercer made an appearance, offering congratulations that seemed almost sincere. You've surprised me, Grant, he said, shaking Rem's hand. I didn't think you had it in you to settle down. The right woman makes all the difference, Rem replied, his arms secure around Thea's waist. As the afternoon waned, Rem and Thea made their goodbyes. Miguel would drive them back to the ranch, where they would spend their wedding night before departing the next day for Denver, a brief honeymoon trip that was Rem's wedding gift to Thea. The ranch was quiet when they arrived, Miguel tactfully leaving them at the main house with a tip of his hat and a warm smile. Rem surprised Thea by sweeping her into his arms to carry her across the threshold. "Welcome home, Mrs. Grant," he said, setting her down in the main room, which had been transformed in their absence. A fire blazed in the hearth, fresh flowers adorned the table despite the season, and a bottle of champagne chilled in a bucket of snow. "Rosa," Rem explained, seeing Thea's surprise. "She insisted on preparing things properly for us." "It's perfect," Thea said, removing her bonnet and gloves. They stood looking at each other, suddenly shy despite weeks of increasingly passionate encounters. This was different. They were husband and wife now, with no need to part at the cabin door, no reason to hold back. Rem broke the tension by moving to open the champagne. "I thought we should toast our new beginning," he said, pouring the bubbling liquid into 2 glasses. "To us, Thea. To finding love when and where we least expected it." "To us," she echoed, sipping the unfamiliar but delicious drink. Rem set his glass down and took hers, placing it beside his own. "May I help you with your dress, Mrs. Grant?" he asked, his voice husky. "Please do, Mr. Grant," Thea replied, turning to present him with the row of tiny buttons down her back. His fingers were surprisingly deft as he unfastened each one, his breath warm against her neck. When the dress loosened, he placed a kiss on the newly exposed skin at the nape of her neck, sending shivers down her spine. "You're trembling," he murmured. "I'm not afraid," Thea assured him, turning to face him. "Just overwhelmed. I never thought I could be this happy." Rem's eyes darkened with desire and tenderness. "I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make you happy, Thea. That's my solemn vow." He kissed her then, deeply and thoroughly, all hesitation gone. Thea responded with equal fervor, her hands moving to unbutton his vest, then his shirt, eager to feel his skin against hers. Rem broke the kiss long enough to whisper, "Shall we move to the bedroom?" At Thea's nod, he took her hand and led her down the hall to what was now their shared room. The bed had been made with fresh linens, turned down invitingly. A single lamp burned low on the bedside table, casting a warm glow over the space. With reverent hands, Rem helped Thea out of her wedding dress, his breath catching as each layer fell away. Thea felt none of the shyness she had expected, only a deep certainty that this was right, that this man was meant to be hers. When they finally came together as husband and wife, it was with a tenderness and passion that brought tears to Thea's eyes. Rem was gentle yet ardent, attentive to her every response, guiding her through the unfamiliar territory of physical love with patience and care. Afterward, as they lay entwined in the quiet darkness, Thea's head resting on Rem's chest, she felt a profound sense of peace. The journey that had begun with heartbreak at Silver Creek Station had led her here to love, to belonging, to a future brighter than any she could have imagined. "Penny for your thoughts," Rem murmured, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "I was thinking about the day we met," Thea admitted. "How desperate and alone I felt when Harris didn't come. I'm almost grateful to the scoundrel," Rem said, pressing a kiss to her hair. "If he'd kept his word, you'd be his wife now instead of mine. Do you remember what you said to me that day?" Thea asked, propping herself up on one elbow to look at him. Rem's brow furrowed in concentration. "I said a lot of things. You said I was waiting for you all along," Thea reminded him. "I thought you were just being kind, offering me a place to stay. But you were right, Remington. I was waiting for you. I just didn't know it yet." Rem's eyes softened with emotion. "I think I knew even then. Something about you called to me from the moment I saw you sitting alone on that platform." He pulled her down for a kiss that quickly rekindled the fire between them. This time, their lovemaking was less hesitant, more passionate, as they explored each other with growing confidence and deepening desire. The Denver honeymoon passed in a blur of happiness, visits to elegant restaurants, a performance at the Opera House, shopping for small luxuries they couldn't find in Silver Creek. But both Rem and Thea were eager to return home, to begin their life together on the ranch that had brought them together. Winter settled in earnest across the Wyoming Territory, bringing short days and long nights that the newlyweds filled with conversations by the fire, shared books and dreams, and the sweet discovery of each other's bodies. The caretaker's cabin stood empty now, Thea having moved her belongings into the main house the day after their wedding. Christmas approached, and Thea threw herself into preparations with childlike enthusiasm. She and Rosa baked cookies and pies, strung popcorn garlands for the small pine tree Rem and Miguel cut from the North Ridge, and fashioned simple gifts for everyone at the ranch. On Christmas Eve, they gathered in the main house Rem and Thea, Miguel and Rosa, and two young cowboys who worked the winter herd and had nowhere else to go for the holiday. Thea had prepared a feast, and after dinner, Rem read the Christmas story from the family Bible he had inherited from his parents. As Thea looked around the table at these people who had become her family in such a short time, she felt a fullness in her heart that threatened to overflow. Catching Rem's eye across the room, she saw in his smile that he felt it too, this blessing of home and hearth, of belonging. Later, when their guests had departed and they were alone, Rem handed Thea a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with red ribbon. "Merry Christmas, my love," he said. Inside was a delicate gold locket on a fine chain. When Thea opened it, she found a tiny photograph of Rem on one side, the other side empty. "I thought," Rem explained, suddenly looking boyishly uncertain, "that someday, maybe, we might put a picture of our child in the other side." Tears filled Thea's eyes as she understood his meaning. "It's perfect," she whispered, reaching up to kiss him. "And someday we will. I have something for you too," she said when they parted, retrieving a package from behind the sofa. Rem unwrapped it to find a handsome leather-bound journal and a new fountain pen. "For your thoughts," Thea explained. "You have such a way with words when you read poetry. I thought perhaps you might want to write some of your own." "No one has ever believed in me that way before," Rem said, deeply touched by the gift and its meaning. They made love that night with special tenderness, the fire casting golden light across their entwined bodies, the future stretching before them full of promise and hope. Winter gave way to spring, and with it came changes to the ranch and to Thea herself. The morning sickness that began in late March confirmed what she had begun to suspect: a baby would join their family before the year was out. When she told Rem, his joy was boundless. He lifted her in a gentle embrace, his face alight with wonder and pride. "A child," he kept saying, as if he couldn't quite believe it. "Our child." Word spread quickly through Silver Creek. Sarah Collins organized a quilting bee specifically to create a baby blanket. The Petersons sent a beautiful cradle that Mr. Peterson had crafted himself. Even Jonathan Mercer stopped by the ranch one day to offer congratulations and a silver cup engraved with the baby's future birth date. "Peace offering," he explained gruffly when Rem looked suspicious. A man reassesses his priorities when he sees others building a family. As Thea's body changed, so did her role on the ranch. She couldn't ride out with Rem anymore, but she took on more of the bookkeeping and business aspects, freeing him to focus on the physical work. They made a good team, complementing each other's strengths. One warm evening in July, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Rem placed his hand on Thea's rounded belly, marveling at the strong kicks of their active child. "Boy or girl, what do you think?" he asked, a question that had become a favorite game between them. "A boy," Thea said confidently, "with your blue eyes and stubborn chin." Rem laughed. "I was going to say a girl, with your intelligence and courage." "We'll know soon enough," Thea said, covering his hand with her own. "Just a few more months." "Are you happy, Thea?" Rem asked suddenly, his expression serious. "With this life, with me? Happier than I ever dreamed possible," she answered without hesitation. "Are you?" "More than I have words to express," Rem said, drawing her close. "Sometimes I wake up in the night and watch you sleeping beside me, and I can hardly believe you're really there, that all of this isn't just a dream I'll wake from." "It's real," Thea assured him, kissing him softly. "We're real, and we have a lifetime ahead of us." Robert James Grant was born on a crisp October morning, arriving with a lusty cry that announced his presence to the world. He had his father's blue eyes and a thatch of dark hair that Rem insisted came from Thea. Holding their son for the first time, Thea felt a love so powerful it took her breath away. Beside her, Rem wept unashamedly, one finger gently stroking the baby's tiny hand. "Hello, Robert," he whispered. "Welcome home. Named for your father?" Thea asked, remembering Rem's stories of the man who had raised him to be honorable and kind. "And for your grandfather," Rem nodded. "Robert Montgomery Grant. A good, strong name for a good, strong boy." As Robert grew, so did the rocking G. Rem's careful management and Thea's astute business sense resulted in a thriving operation that became one of the most respected ranches in the territory. They added more cattle, improved the breeding stock, and built a larger barn to accommodate the expanding enterprise. The caretaker's cabin was renovated and expanded to house a schoolteacher Rem hired to instruct not only Robert, but also the children of their growing number of ranch hands. Education was important to both Rem and Thea, and they were determined their son would have every advantage, even on a remote Wyoming ranch. 2 years after Robert's birth, Thea gave birth to twin girls Elizabeth and Catherine, named for her mother and Rem's. The house rang with children's laughter, and Rem often said it was the sweetest sound he'd ever heard. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Rem surprised Thea with a special gift, a small printing press installed in a converted storage room off the main house. "For your stories," he explained when she looked confused. "I've seen you writing in the evenings after the children are asleep. I thought perhaps you might want to publish them someday." Thea was stunned. She had indeed been writing stories of frontier life, of strong women finding their way in the West, tales inspired by her own experiences and those of the women she had met in Silver Creek. But she had never mentioned this secret ambition to Remington. "How did you know?" she asked, running her hands reverently over the gleaming machine. "I know you," Rem said simply. "I see the same look in your eyes when you're writing that I feel when I'm reading poetry or working with a young horse, the look of someone doing what they were born to do." Thea's first collection of stories, Frontier Hearts, was printed on that press and sold at the general store in Silver Creek. To her surprise, the modest volume found readers not just locally but beyond, as travelers passing through took copies home to share. A publisher in Denver eventually offered to produce a larger edition, which found its way to bookstores across the West. "Mrs. Remington Grant, author," Rem said proudly, showing everyone who visited the ranch his copy of her book, the pages already worn from multiple readings. 10 years after Thea had stood abandoned at Silver Creek Station, the ranch hosted a celebration, the 10th anniversary of the Rocking G under the Grant family's ownership. Friends and neighbors gathered to mark the occasion, marveling at how the once modest property had grown into one of the territory's showcase ranches. As twilight fell, Rem found Thea standing alone on the porch, watching their children playing with the other youngsters in the yard. "Penny for your thoughts, Mrs. Grant," he said, slipping an arm around her waist. "I was thinking about how differently things might have turned out," Thea admitted, "if Harris had kept his word and met me that day." "I try not to think about that," Rem said, his arm tightening around her. "The idea of you with anyone else. I wouldn't have been happy," Thea said with certainty. "Not the way I am with you. Harris wanted a convenient wife, someone to keep his house and bear his name. You wanted a partner. I wanted you," Rem corrected gently. "Specifically you, Thea. From the moment I saw you sitting alone at that station, looking so brave despite everything." Thea turned in his arms to face him. At 32, Rem was more handsome than ever, silver beginning to thread through the dark hair at his temples, laugh lines crinkling the corners of his eyes. She reached up to touch his face, treasuring the familiar contours. "Do you remember what you said to me that day?" she asked. Rem smiled, the same smile that still made her heart skip a beat after all these years. "I said you were waiting for me all along." "And I was," Thea agreed, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. "I just didn't know it yet." Over the years that followed, the legend of their meeting became a favorite family story, told and retold to their children, and eventually to their grandchildren. The tale of the abandoned mail-order bride and the cowboy who claimed her became woven into the fabric of the Rocking G's history, a testament to the unexpected ways love can find us when we least expect it. Rem and Thea grew old together on the ranch they had built, watching their children mature into capable adults who carried forward their values and vision. Robert took over the ranch operations, The twins both became teachers, Elizabeth in Silver Creek's now proper school, Catherine at a prestigious girls' academy in Denver. Thea continued writing well into her 70s, producing a series of books that earned her recognition as one of the West's authentic literary voices. Rem, true to the gift she had given him that first Christmas, filled journal after journal with poetry, some published alongside Thea's stories, others kept private, love poems meant only for her eyes. On cool evenings, they still sat together on the porch, watching the sun set over the land that had given them so much. Their hands, weathered now with age and work, remained entwined, the connection between them as strong as it had been that first day at Silver Creek Station. No regrets. Rem would sometimes ask, though he knew the answer. Not one. Thea would always reply. Every step, every choice led me to you. How could I regret that? And in the golden light of the setting sun, with the ranch stretching out before them and the sounds of family all around, they would share a smile that needed no words, a smile that spoke of a journey begun in disappointment, but transformed by love into a life. Neither could have imagined that dusty afternoon when an abandoned bride found her true destiny in the eyes of an unexpected cowboy.